What if I told you that one of the greatest cities in Africa's history was hidden for centuries, and when Europeans finally found it, they tried to erase it from history? This isn't just a story about ancient ruins. This is about a lost city. Stone towers rising out of the African landscape, walls built without mortar that still stand today. A place that rewrote everything we thought we knew about African civilization. But for years, the truth about Great Zimbabwe was twisted, buried, and denied, so what were they trying to hide? When most people think about ancient civilizations, they imagine the pyramids of Egypt, the temples of Greece, maybe the Great Wall of China. But very few ever mention Great Zimbabwe, a massive stone city in southern Africa that once ruled a powerful empire. Here's the problem. For over a century, this place has been surrounded by silence, doubt, and straight-up lies. When European colonizers stumbled on the ruins in the 19th century, they couldn't believe that black Africans could have built something so advanced. So instead of looking for the truth, they invented stories. Some claimed the city was built by the Phoenicians. Others said it was the lost kingdom of the Queen of Sheba. Anything but the idea that Africans themselves had created it. And here's where it gets dark. These lies weren't just guesses. They were part of a bigger plan to deny Africa's history, to make it look like African people needed saving, like they had no past, no great civilizations, no real culture, just tribes wandering the bush. That false story stuck around for a long time. Even school books in the 20th century called it a mystery, but archaeologists, historians, and local voices knew better. Bit by bit, they started pulling back the curtain. So today, we're asking the real question. What really happened at Great Zimbabwe? Who built it and why? And what secrets does it still hold, buried in stone? Let's go deeper. Picture this. You're walking through the rolling hills of southeastern Zimbabwe. The air is dry, the sun is harsh, and suddenly, rising out of the landscape, you see massive stone walls. Circular, complex, some reaching over 30 feet high, all built without any mortar. No cement, no glue, just stone, perfectly placed, holding strong after 700 years. That's Great Zimbabwe. It's not just one building, it's an entire city. At its peak, it stretched across almost 720 hectares, or roughly 1,800 acres. That's bigger than many medieval European cities of the same time. It had a central complex called the Great Enclosure, a royal hilltop fortress known as the Hill Complex, and smaller residential areas for the elite and commoners. Some parts of the city were built just for ceremonies. Others were for the king and his court. Some had soapstone carvings, narrow passageways, and platforms used for speaking to the crowds. This place wasn't random. Everything had a purpose. The architecture, the layout, even the walls, they were all part of something bigger, a kingdom, a culture, a story we're only now beginning to piece together. Now here's the twist. Nobody called it Great Zimbabwe when it was alive. The name Zimbabwe comes from the Shona phrase Zimba Diza Mabwe, which means houses of stone. So Great Zimbabwe literally just means great houses of stone. It's kind of like calling it the Big Stone City. But this wasn't just a city, it was the capital of a massive trading empire. Let's talk about the people who built it. Forget the nonsense about Phoenicians or lost white civilizations. The truth is a lot more powerful, and a lot more African. Great Zimbabwe was built by the ancestors of today's Shona people. These are the same people who still live in the region, speak related languages, and pass down oral histories about the site. The construction started sometime around the 11th century. That's over 900 years ago. At the time, the Shona were already skilled in farming, herding, mining, and most impressively, stone masonry. But they didn't just stack rocks. They engineered walls that curved like snakes, narrow corridors that created echoes, and towers that had no clear military purpose but symbolized power and spirituality. What's incredible is that they did all this with simple tools. No cranes, no modern chisels, just manpower, muscle, and ancient wisdom. The granite stones were heated with fire, then cooled with water until they cracked. Then the stones were shaped and laid down, layer by layer, locked in without any cement. Think about that for a second. These walls have stood for nearly 1,000 years without collapsing, while some modern buildings can barely last a decade. And it wasn't just about architecture. The Shona were creating something cultural, something symbolic. Certain shapes, patterns, and placements had meaning. The famous conical tower in the Great Enclosure, no one knows exactly what it was used for. But most believe it had spiritual significance, maybe connected to ancestors, kingship, or even fertility. The more we look at the site, the clearer it becomes. This was a place of power, knowledge, and sacred connection. But Great Zimbabwe wasn't isolated, it was plugged into the wider world. Next up, how a kingdom in southern Africa became a global trading hub. Here's something that will blow your mind. Archaeologists have found artifacts in Great Zimbabwe that came from China, Persia, and the Middle East, thousands of kilometers away. How does something like that happen in a landlocked city in southern Africa, centuries before modern transport? One word: trade. Great Zimbabwe wasn't just a stone city in the middle of nowhere, it was the beating heart of an economic network that stretched across the Indian Ocean. The people here weren't just builders, they were merchants, diplomats, and entrepreneurs. At the core of this trade empire? Gold. The region around Great Zimbabwe was rich in gold deposits, and the locals knew how to mine and process it. Gold dust and nuggets were traded by weight, usually using small scales. This gold didn't stay local for long. Traders from the Swahili coast, modern-day Kenya and Tanzania, would travel inland to trade goods. In exchange for gold, the Shona elites received luxury items like Chinese porcelain, Persian glass, and Islamic prayer beads. That's right, in the middle of the African interior 700 years ago, someone was sipping from Chinese bowls and decorating with glassware from Iran. Ivory was another big export. Elephant tusks were highly prized in the Arab world and in Asia, used for everything from religious statues to knife handles. And how did all this trade physically happen? The goods moved through a network of towns and cities connected to Great Zimbabwe, places like Kami, Mapungubwe, and Sofala. From there they reached the ports of the Swahili coast and shipped across the Indian Ocean to the Arabian Peninsula, India, and China. This wasn't a trickle of trade. This was serious business. It made Great Zimbabwe rich. And that wealth? It showed in the city's construction, the elite lifestyles, and the powerful kings who ruled from behind those stone walls. But as the city grew in power, so did the envy and the disbelief. Because here's where the story gets twisted. By the time Europeans stumbled onto the ruins of Great Zimbabwe in the late 1800s, the site had already been abandoned for hundreds of years. What they saw was jaw-dropping: massive stone walls, intricate designs, and a city layout that rivaled castles in Europe. And their first reaction: this couldn't have been built by Africans, let that sink in. Instead of asking how it was built, or who might have done it, early European explorers immediately assumed someone else had to be responsible. Some pointed to the Phoenicians, a seafaring people from the ancient Middle East. Others said it was the lost city of Ophir, where King Solomon got his gold. Some even dragged in Queen Sheba, claiming she must have ruled from here. It didn't matter that local Shona people told them over and over, our ancestors built this. The colonizers didn't listen. Why? Because admitting that Africans had created a massive, sophisticated city with international trade, government, religion, and architecture didn't fit the racist narrative of the time. Colonial powers needed to justify conquest, and that meant portraying Africa as primitive. So they buried the truth. Literally. European archaeologists dug through the ruins, smashing through sacred spaces, destroying artifacts, and cherry-picking evidence. One of the worst was a guy named James Theodore Bent. In the 1890s, he was sent by Cecil Rhodes, the British colonial overlord of the area, to investigate the ruins. Bent wasn't even an archaeologist. He had no formal training, but his reports were taken as gospel. He said the site had Semitic influence and that it was likely built by foreigners. His conclusion? Africans might have lived there, but they didn't build it. It was a lie, and it stuck. For nearly 100 years, school books, museums, and even official records said Great Zimbabwe was mysterious or built by others. It wasn't until African scholars, independent archaeologists, and historians pushed back that the truth started to come out. But the damage was already done. Now we have to ask, why did they go so far to erase the truth? Let's not sugarcoat it. The cover-up wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. Great Zimbabwe wasn't just ignored, it was actively erased from Africa's historical record by the same people who claimed they were bringing civilization to the continent. So why? Because the existence of Great Zimbabwe shattered a dangerous myth. The myth that black Africans were always tribal, scattered, and incapable of building advanced societies. That they had no cities, no empires, no writing systems, no organized religion, no international trade. The city of Great Zimbabwe destroyed that narrative in one blow. Here was a thriving city built from stone, connected to global trade, ruled by African kings, with a population that may have reached 20,000 at its peak, richer and more powerful than many cities in Europe at the time. If that truth spread, How do you justify colonizing Zimbabwe? How do you defend taking land from people who clearly had their own nations, economies, and governments long before Europeans arrived? You don't. So colonial leaders and settlers shut that truth down. They censored reports, dismissed local oral traditions, and banned African-led research. Even during Rhodesia's apartheid-style rule in the 20th century, the government actively removed references to Great Zimbabwe from school curricula. Museum exhibits were edited. Textbooks were rewritten. Some researchers were even fired for saying the site was African in origin. The logic was chillingly simple. If people start believing in the greatness of their past, they might stop accepting oppression in the present. That's the real secret. Great Zimbabwe wasn't just a threat to history, it was a threat to control. And yet, the story couldn't be buried forever, because stones don't lie. And eventually people started listening. By the late 20th century, something started to shift. African scholars, archaeologists, and truth-seekers began reclaiming the story of Great Zimbabwe. One of the most important figures was David Randall McIver. Back in 1905, he was one of the first European archaeologists to actually say, "Hey, there's zero evidence that anyone but Africans built this." But even his findings were buried for decades. Later came Roger Somers in the mid-20th century, who also supported the African origin of the ruins, and got attacked for it. But the real breakthrough came post-independence, after Zimbabwe gained freedom from colonial rule in 1980. One of the first acts of the new government, renaming the country, they chose Zimbabwe, after the ruins. It was more than symbolic. It was a statement. This is our history, and we're done letting others define it. Since then, Zimbabwean archaeologists have led new digs and studies. They've worked to preserve the site, protect the artifacts, and tell the real story in schools and museums. Even local communities, descendants of the Shona, have been invited back into the conversation. Elders share oral histories passed down through generations. Rituals and beliefs connected to the site are being rediscovered and respected. UNESCO declared Great Zimbabwe a World Heritage Site in 1986. And slowly the lies are being replaced with pride. But even now there's more we don't know. When you walk through the ruins today, it's not just the size that hits you, it's the feeling. The curved walls, narrow walkways, and elevated platforms weren't just for defense. They were designed to control space, sound, and presence. Priests and kings didn't need microphones. The architecture amplified their voices. Everything here had meaning. Take the soapstone birds, for example. 8 of them were found at the site, each carved with intricate detail. Some scholars say they represent royal totems. Others think they're connected to ancestral spirits, or perhaps the mythical Batalur eagle, known as the messenger between worlds in Shona beliefs. There's also the conical tower. No windows, no doors, just a solid tapered cylinder inside the great enclosure. No one knows exactly what it was for, but many believe it symbolized male power or fertility. Others say it was the king's link to the ancestors, like a spiritual antenna. Whatever the interpretation, one thing is clear. Great Zimbabwe wasn't just a capital city, it was a sacred place, a place of rituals, authority, and divine connection. Even now, local communities treat it with respect. Ceremonies are still held, visitors are asked not to climb certain areas, because this isn't just history, it's living memory. But not all the mysteries are spiritual. Some are straight up unsolved. Despite everything we've learned, Great Zimbabwe still holds secrets. For example, why was the city abandoned? We know it was at its peak between the 11th and 15th centuries, but by the 16th century it was empty. Why? Some theories say environmental collapse. Maybe the population grew too large for the local resources. Deforestation, drought, or soil exhaustion could have made the area unsustainable. Others point to political shifts. Maybe a rival city took over. Maybe the king relocated to a new capital, like Kami or Mutapa, to be closer to trade routes. Some believe spiritual reasons were involved, that the site had fulfilled its purpose, or that an ancestral sign told the people to leave. The truth? We don't really know, and we may never fully know. Another mystery, who exactly were the kings? We've uncovered buildings, artifacts, and graves, but no written records. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, the people of Great Zimbabwe didn't use writing in the way we think of it. Their stories were told orally, through elders, music, and ceremony. That means names, dates, and dynasties are lost to time. We can only guess from ruins, bones, and symbols. Even the city's full population size is debated. Some say 10,000. Others say it could have reached 20,000. That would have made it one of the largest cities in the world at the time. And here's a question almost no one asks. What other cities like this might still be hidden? Zimbabwe isn't the only place where stone ruins exist. Other sites, less studied, less famous, may be out there waiting to tell their stories. Maybe Great Zimbabwe was just the beginning. Great Zimbabwe isn't a mystery, it's a memory. A memory of what Africa was before the lies. Before the maps got redrawn. Before anyone said they couldn't have built that. It's a place of genius, power, trade, art, and spirit. But most of all, it's proof. Proof that African civilizations weren't just equal to others, they were leaders in their own right, builders of stone cities, rulers of empires, traders across oceans. For too long, history tried to bury that. But the stones wouldn't stay silent. Today, Great Zimbabwe stands tall, not just as a ruin, but as a reminder. The truth always finds a way back. If you enjoy our journey, please like and subscribe to our channel, and if you like our content and want to support me, you are welcome to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below.